Thank you very much, Upma, for that introduction, and also for your partnership with the DIT team at the British High Commission over the years. It's a really excellent partnership, and I'm delighted to be here with you and with participants now to talk about how we can actually increase that partnership going forward. So you mentioned the strength of the healthcare innovation within the UK, and it's true that this is something that we are really known about because we have absolutely developed some really kind of world-changing innovations in the UK. So I wanted to just mention a few things and then allow you to get on experts talking to experts, but just a few kind of top-level things I'd like to draw attention to about the UK, which relates to the potential for UK-Singapore collaboration in this area. So the UK's history in this area is really well known, but I think one of the things that makes me so excited to be finding and supporting partnerships in this area is how strong this sector is going to be to our future. And you can tell that from the amount of money that is being invested in it by government and by the private sector. So in 2017, the UK government spent £2.25 billion on health R&D, and that's second highest government health R&D spending behind the UK, and double what it was for Germany, which was the next comparative company. So that just shows the extent of government leaning to this sector and to quite how far ahead we are in government support for innovation. Our industrial strategy, so the UK's overall industrial strategy, has set an ambition to increase R&D spending yet further to reach 2.5% of GDP by 2027. And that could see health R&D spending hit £14 billion. We're also supported by two UK government life sciences sector deals. These deals bring public and private investments into the sector to support startups, to support innovation, to support growth within that sector. In December 2019, there are 25 commitments for investment, including one from Merck for the creation of research facility supporting 950 jobs. So this is a really significant area of growth. 950 jobs is no small feat for a new investment. As of January 2020, substantial progress has already been made with an additional £4 billion invested in R&D since 2017. And I think some of the partners that you can find in there, including NIHR, who are a partner in this event here today, are also demonstrating quite how much they're doing to enable collaboration, to enable international partnerships that are going to lead to jobs, growth and benefit for humanity in this area. In 2018-19, NIHR research infrastructure supported over 4,400 industry, collaborative and contract research studies. That's an 8-fold increase from a decade before that. So that is again showing this really strong trajectory of investment and activity. They also had a record year supporting over 1,500 commercial studies. And in August 2020, UKRI and NIHR made £8.4 million available to 3 UK-wide studies to develop better tests, to define immunity and to study the body's immune response to COVID-19. And I think that fact shows kind of the responsiveness and the flexibility that there is within the UK's innovation ecosystem. I just wanted to say one more thing about why I think the UK is special in this area, clinical research and potential application in the wider world. And that is because of the National Health Service. You mentioned it, Upma, but the National Health Service is an integrated, very large health service that has worked extremely hard to make sure that there is a very close link between clinicians making responsible and excellent use of data. And when I was speaking to an international MedTech expert, I said, do you think there's anything that marks the UK out as particularly extraordinary and special? And this international expert said to me, yes, there is actually. And it's partly to do with the size and the depth and the strength of the NHS, which has actually allowed many of the innovations that happen within the UK to be developed with end patient benefit as its driving factor. So that means that some of the innovations that get to fruition, all of the innovations that get to fruition, have been guided by that rather than by pure commercial outcomes. So it means that what comes out of the innovation centre system is really kind of fit for purpose in delivering benefit for people, for patients, and for the whole of the health system. And that is when it's really obvious that there are really, really clear commercial applications, because the benefits have been really strongly proven. I think one of the pleasures of my job is finding out all of the many and various, and supporting all of the many and various links between the UK and Singapore. And in this area, they are really extremely strong. There are so many Singapore researchers and clinicians who have really strong links with their homologues in the UK. Throughout COVID even, I've been really sort of heartwarmed by some of the amazing stories that are coming out from Singapore researchers that are fully embedded into our own system, who are working on finding solutions to COVID. I'm sure many of you have seen a story that was covered by CNA of a Singaporean studying a researcher in the University of Dundee, whose research was moved on to finding therapeutics for anti-inflammatory in the lungs. So that's the kind of thing that shows the relevance, the agility, and the importance of some of the research partnerships. But I also realised that our system and our country can be, it's so big that I think sometimes if you're looking for a partnership within our system, it can almost be a little bit kind of over-facing, and finding your way, if you're taking a step to try and find a new partnership in a different country, sometimes that can be a little bit hard to work out exactly how do you take that first step. So on that, I wanted to say that we are here to support you, and Catalyst is there to support you as well. But the Department of International Trade team at the British High Commission, it is their role to help people who are really keen on taking a first step to find partnerships in the UK, to find their way through our systems, to find their way to the best potential collaborators, so that you can actually talk in depth to some of those people, and to make sure that anything that at first sight looks like a bit of an obstacle can be explained, and we can help you find your way through it. So I'm really pleased this event is happening. I'm really pleased that you're showing interest in what there is to offer in partnerships between this region, between Singapore, between this region, and between the UK. I think the strength of this sector in the UK is only going to grow, including because it's underpinned by really strong private sector and government investment. And finally, we're here to help. We're here to help you find your way through. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what are some of the key points and the key ideas that come out of this event. Upman, I'm very happy to answer any questions, but back to you.
Thank you so much, Cara. I'll invite Colin to take over from here. Colin, over to you now.
Thank you, Cara, for that opening statement. And thank you, Catalyst, for hosting this webinar. This is DIT's second collaboration with Catalyst in the past year. Our first collaboration was in October last year, where the team from British HighCom, including DIT, Scottish Development International, and Science and Innovation team, gave a broad overview of UK's healthcare scene. Today, we really are drilling down on the first step stage that Cara mentioned, and that is to access the UK healthcare scene. It is complex, and I hope today the specialists will provide the first step in that phase, which is clinical research and funding. We do hope by the end of the webinar, you'll have a deeper understanding of UK's MedTech development landscape, the evaluation pathway to the MedTech products in the UK, how challenges in delivering clinical evaluations can be addressed, and fundamentally, and more importantly as well, where to access potential sources of funding for development and projects. Funding is always a big key, and we see that with many of our other tech sectors looking to go into the United Kingdom. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Ivana Poparic to give an overview of UK's clinical evidence generation programme, the regulatory landscape, and NIHR's collaborative support. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ivana.
Thank you, Colin. So without any further ado, if we can see the slides, I will tell you first about clinical evidence generation in the UK and support you can get from our organization, National Institute for Health Research. That's not my slides. Next slide, please. So let's start with the UK's MedTech landscape. Next slide, please. So next slide, thank you. So in the UK, healthcare is divided into the 4 sectors. Firstly, we have National Healthcare Service, or NHS, which is the world's only fully integrated public healthcare system. It is regarded as the leading healthcare system in the world, and it's publicly funded and free at the point of access. And it's the main consumer, buyer, and commissioner of medical technologies in the UK. Next one is the private healthcare, which is an area of the growth in the UK. It is benefiting both from the government's outsourcing initiatives caused by growing demands on the NHS, but also from the corporate schemes and employee benefit schemes that are playing an increasing role in this area. Social care is also seeing a rapid growth in the areas of using new technologies that could improve assisted living or independent living or care being managed at the patient's home. And finally, in the consumer health, we're seeing growth in the mobile healthcare apps and fitness products being used. Also, convergence of different wearable technologies is enabling UK's population to improve their lifestyle choices. Thank you, next slide. So as the NHS accounts for the largest part of the healthcare spending in the country, I will focus today on that segment. There was a report last year published by Academic Health Sciences Network, or HSNs, which showed that in England alone, NHS spends £6 billion on medical technologies. Half of that spending includes consumables, and the other half are complex devices. The MedTech industry accounts for more than 86,000 jobs in the country, and almost 1/3 of those is actually in the small companies. Biggest employers are orthopedic devices and single-use technologies companies. They're followed by assistive technologies, hospital hardware, and in vitro diagnostic manufacturers. MedTech companies you can see on this map are distributed across all of the country, which includes more than 100 science and innovation parks. So I was asked today to say a few words about impacts of COVID-19 on the MedTech sector in the country. In short, the response to pandemic has increased the need for a number of devices. This is including in vitro diagnostics for point of care and at home testing, but also for imaging and biosensing devices. To avoid spread of infection, we now need technologies for COVID cases tracking, but we also need technologies that provide solutions for remote consultations and patient monitoring at home or in care setting. To free up clinicians' time and to reduce the costs, we need technologies for enhancing efficiency of task-based activities. And finally, there has been a lot of effort to develop AI and other solutions for drug discovery and clinical trials, so we can expedite both vaccine and therapeutics development. Next slide, please. So in the last 6 months of the pandemic, there has been a lot of reports around how MedTech industry in general can adapt to pandemic. The one that I found particularly interesting is from Deloitte, and you can find it online. It's available freely. And it offers 6 practical steps that MedTech companies can take. The first of them I have already mentioned, and they address developing COVID-related technologies. But the remaining ones are more focused on the companies that are developing other technologies. And what they suggest basically is to develop digital clinical tools to monitor the product throughout its life cycle. So the manufacturer doesn't need to visit the consumer after the product has already been sold to them, but also, if possible, to offer sales services and training in the digital way. Another good point of, basically addresses the manufacturing, and they're proposing to manufacturers to provide agile and ready response to changes in demand. So for instance, if you're a surgical devices company, you know that now at the peak of the pandemic, there would be a reduced need for surgical devices because selective surgeries have been decreased. Also, one should consider ensuring supply chain, especially locally to the consumer, but also providing innovative solutions for providing consumables or parts of the new devices. Next slide, please. So what is the role of National Institute for Health Research in this? Next slide. So with aim to improve the health and wealth of the nation throughout research, we are the largest funder of health and care research in the UK. We are a virtual organization that supports translational research and management of clinical trials across the NHS and partner universities. We have a total budget of just above £1 billion a year, and we support collaborative projects between industry, charities, academia, and other funders with NHS to develop therapeutics, medical devices, and in vitro diagnostics. Next slide, please. So to get an idea of scale of the research in the UK, here's the data showing our work in financial year 2017-18, when we have delivered more than 2,000 new clinical trials, including 1/3 of those being commercially sponsored. There has been almost 800,000 patients recruited in that year. This year, we have went above 1 million already, and 50% of those participated in commercial trials. And 99% of the NHS trusts are research active. To get an understanding of the MedTech sector here, we have delivered around 200 trials a year with more than 100 companies and 30 CROs, and we have around 9,000 patients participating yearly in commercially delivered clinical trials. Next slide, please. So what is our offer to the MedTech industry? Next slide, please. If you can click through it. Thank you. So our support actually includes developing technologies at any stage, and depending on the class of your product and on the different amount of the clinical and economic evidence will be needed to access the NHS. So what we can do is we can help you find appropriate expertise for product evaluation and guide you towards adoption into the NHS. We can also connect you to the regulatory agencies and to the wider health system, including government departments, research funders, and local organizations. Our offer to MedTech industry includes access to clinical and scientific expertise, to research facilities, to trial setup and management. Can you go please back to the previous slide? To funding, to data provision, and access to patient samples and patient involvement in design of your trials. Next slide, please. So for the MedTech and IVD companies particularly, we can highlight support in development and evaluation, which is provided by MedTech in vitro diagnostic cooperatives, or as we call them, MICs, So these are 11 NIHR research centers that are distributed across England, and they bring together clinicians, bioengineers, health economics experts, patients, and also NHS commissioners to ensure that the new technologies are evaluated and also to collect the evidence which is needed to meet the regulatory requirements in the country. They also do research to demonstrate the value to the NHS. Next slide, please. So if you're a company that already has funding and the protocol developed, the easiest way for you to access the clinical infrastructure within the country is through NIHR Clinical Research Network, or CRN. There are 15 local CRN networks across England, and each of them delivers research across all 30 clinical specialties. Next slide, please. So if you want to access a patient's data and samples or analysis services for the research you have already done, we can connect you to the national and local organizations. Some of them are including NIHR BioResearch, which already has over 100,000 consented patients, Patient Engagement Services, National Biosample Centre, UK Biobank, which now has over 500,000 participants in a longitudinal study of 40 to 69-year-old people. For metabolomics, you can access NIHR Phenome Center. And to access primary, secondary care data, you can go for organizations such as NHS Digital, HDR UK, Genomics England, and so on. Next slide, please. At the end, I would just like to highlight some additional support services we can provide. So first is access to the regulators, so NICE, or National Institute for Clinical Excellence, provides a national guidance and advice to improve health and social care, which basically means they provide guidance on how to do things within the NHS and also recommendations on which products to purchase. MHRA is our regulator for medicines, medical devices, and blood components for transfusion in the UK. And both them and NICE offer advice to companies across the development pathway and market access phases. What we recommend to companies that are doing clinical research in the country is to talk very early to MHRA and NICE and get the right type of information on what kind of evidence they will need to present. Next slide, please. Also, we can connect you to local organizations for support in adoption and dissemination. So there are organizations across super regions and devolved nations, including MedCity in the southeast of England, NHSA and Northern Powerhouse in the north of England, but also Invest Northern Ireland, Life Sciences Hub Wales, or MediWales, and Life Sciences in Scotland. We have also a network of 15 academic health sciences networks, which are key innovation arm within the NHS, and they also participate in support for the funding. My colleague Ian Newington is going to talk to you about NIHR funding later on. And at the end, I would like to just mention Accelerated Access Collaborative, which is an umbrella body across the UK healthcare innovation system. So they offer a joined up support from various organizations in setting the strategy for innovation, but also for identifying those most promising technologies and offering them a very expedited evaluation and adoption into the system. At the end, I would just like to mention a few case studies to give you an example how you can work with NIHR. So the first one comes from a company called Mologix, which have developed a urine-based system called Head Start for COPD patients. This system monitors early indications of exacerbations. And then they have developed a second system, Right Start, which is actually helping healthcare professionals to decide which patients should receive the treatment. They have worked closely with clinical MedTech and health economics experts from 2 NIHR MICs from Oxford and Newcastle. And they have, in collaboration with those centers, obtained SBR funding, about which you're gonna hear later, to enable clinical and effectiveness studies for the CE mark. And now the study is working, now the company is working with University of Leicester to do clinical usability studies. Next slide, please. The next company comes from the US, and they have developed a visor system. The company is called Cerebrotech Medical. And this visor is allowing for the real-time assessment of the brain status following stroke or another brain injury. So they are allowing for potential earlier intervention. They have worked with NIHR Trauma Mix Center in Birmingham, which provided company with advice on how to launch this new product into the European and UK markets and how to do the beta testing for the product. The two organizations have also successfully obtained some funding, and that allowed them to do a feasibility study in the volunteers and the usability study with the nursing and clinical staff in Birmingham hospitals. Additionally, TraumaMIC has also led another study with Coventry University to investigate the usability device in E&E and with paramedic services. So the visor device is now CE marked and it's cleared by FDA. Next slide, please. So just to summarize how we can actually help you. What we can provide is access to the world-leading expertise, research management, and funding to enable you to generate evidence required for the market access in the UK. We can help you build bespoke collaborations around your research interests with universities and hospitals in the country and support you in access to funding. We can also connect you to the wider UK infrastructure and government, including Department of Health and Social Care, DIT, trade associations, and local clusters. To emphasize at the end, our services are free of charge for both UK and overseas companies. Next slide. Oh, and for any questions, you can actually type them for later. And I think my email address is going to be available. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivana. I'd invite people to save up the questions towards the end, and we'll move on to Dr. Ian Newington, who will talk about NIHR's funding opportunities for the MedTech and digital industry. Over to you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about some funding for devices, diagnostics and digital. In particular, I'm going to focus on a couple of things. If you go to the next slide, please. Just to tell you roughly what I'm going to discuss about NIHR funding programs in general, particular focus around the I4I, or Invention for Innovation program, which is exclusively focused on MedTech. Talk about the AI in Healthcare Award, which is an NHSX and NIHR joint award, and to give you some links and contacts to make. Next slide, please. Okay, as you saw the pie chart earlier on, the funding programs in NIHR roughly represent about 25% of the money that is spent each year. These are a number of programs that we fund. Most of these are effectively funding clinical trials and clinical studies at different stages of the development cycle. I4I is slightly different in that it helps you in terms of development, as well as in doing some of that early clinical and translational part. That if you're a digital technology company and you're focused around service delivery rather than direct intervention with patients, then HS&DR is potentially an option, as they are more focused around that. And I4I doesn't deal with sort of hospital type systems and won't fund that area. So next slide, please. So move on to the next slide. This is an overview of the I4I program. So who are we? What do we do? We are the translational funding scheme. It's led by a program director who is an entrepreneur himself. He's actually now on the board of a number of multinationals, as well as chairing some small companies, and has invested and been an investor and been working in the MedTech space for probably 30 to 35 years. We have quite a big team of program managers that support him. We're interested in funding some breakthrough technologies. We're not interested in funding some of those Me Too type products. We're looking for things which are going to make a significant difference to patients and to the healthcare system. So if you'd like to move on to the next slide. All this is happening, and you've heard some of these things from Ivana. There's a lot of things going on in the UK in terms of the context. Industrial strategy, particularly focused with life sciences areas and some particular areas of focus that are helping to point companies towards areas to be particularly interested in. Accelerated access, which is about trying to generate a faster path into the health service for new interventions that are going to make significant difference and need to be adopted more widely and more quickly. The NHS long-term plan, it's worth having a look at that if you're interested in understanding what it is the NHS is really looking for over the next 10 years. This is a 10-year plan that's been laid out. We're in year 2, I think, at the moment, and there's some clear direction, and there will be things coming out each year that describe specific areas that they're focusing on during the year. But this will tell you some of the particular things that the NHS are looking for to do. And then there's a whole issue about regulatory landscape, and particularly around as the UK leaves Europe and some changes that are happening there. So again, as Ivana said, it's well worth talking to the MHRA quite early in your progress. Next slide, please. So I4I funds across the development cycle, and we will fund you at different stages. Yes, you can go on to that next part. It's a fairly complex landscape for different bits of funding, and you're going to hear a little bit more about that from Michael as well. In I4I terms, we'll go from roughly TRL3, which is the kind of where most in the UK, where most of our research councils finish their funding, and through to TRL8 now. So next slide, please. We fund across the whole of the nation and across all of the different health categories. So in terms of the nation, I think it's important to say that the NIHR is the National Institute of Health Research for England, and it's funded through the Department of Health and Social Care for England. So we have arrangements with the devolved nations of the UK, but primarily the lead organisation in our funding would need to be based in England. So that might be a collaborator for you, or it might be an opportunity for you to set something up in the UK. We are a response mode funder in terms of this programme, and so which is why we pretty much fund across all the different health categories. Next slide, please. We're interested in funding across that what we call the valley of death, and probably if you as a company will understand that position, where really you've got a great idea, you may have some evidence around it, but you haven't got enough to persuade an investor to give you some sensible money to do something with it, and getting across that gap is what we're there for. Over the roughly 10 to 11 years of the programme in its current form, we've awarded 212 contracts, and roughly in excess of 150 million has been invested. Next slide, please. The programme comes in 3 different streams of funding. Probably certainly the kind of highlight and the leading area is our Programme Development Award in the top left. You can be, as a lead organisation, you can be a university or higher education institution, NHS organisation, or a small and medium-sized enterprise, or indeed another research type institute. Up to 3 years of funding. It needs to be collaborative, so it needs to be more than one organisation bidding for the money. And actually, given the complexity of what you're trying to do at that stage, it's almost certain you're going to have a number of collaborators. There is no upper limit to the funding. The main upper limit to the funding is the amount of money that the programme has in its budget each year. What we ask you to do is to tell us what you want to do and how much it's going to cost. The committee that's going to make the funding decision may have a view on that, and there may be some discussion, but largely we fund from probably our active portfolio somewhere around about 350,000 up to over 2 million of funding in the Product Development Award. Our Challenge Award is now focused on real world implementation. So this is where we get to the kind of TRL8 level. So we're interested in, you will need to have a regulatory approval in place, but the interest here is that you need more data or more evidence than that in order to persuade commissioners and people who are going to purchase your device or your technology. And the best way to do that is in a real world setting. So again, using some of the connections that Ivana was talking about, we can link you up with clinical people who will be interested in supporting you in doing this and actually implementing this in the National Health Service and generating evidence. Again, no upper limit for funding, up to 3 years, potentially slightly longer if there's patient follow-up needed to be involved in this. You will need to have an NHS organisation as one of the collaborative partners for that part of the scheme. And then there's our I4I, so going back one more, go back to one slide, please. The third area is the I4I Connect, which is small amounts of sort of priming funding, sort of bridging you across various gaps in the funding cycle, up to 150,000, 6 to 12 months, and it has to be led by an SME. In that case, you can have collaborators, but it can be an individual award. Next slide, please. We consider ourselves an SME-friendly program. There are some concerns in some cases about the length of time it takes to get some of those larger amounts of money through our process. But in our portfolio currently, over 56% of the portfolio, either as applicants or co-applicants, are SMEs. And although it says no SME in the other, probably there are SMEs involved as contract research organisations or consultancies and bringing other additional expertise to the collaborations. One of the things that we also do particularly is we will provide you with somebody from the program, one of our program managers, to support you through the program. So yes, they'll be monitoring and seeing, making sure what's happening on the program, but actually our key role there is to help you and to support you and help signpost you, and maybe almost act as an extra consultant to you in that process. So next slide, please. Just a few examples of the sorts of things that we funded, ranging from something like here, the StopFrac, which is an AI-based imaging technology, through to some hardware, such as Creo Medical's endoscopic system, which we funded some of the early stage, through to gamified rehab systems, point-of-care testing, almost entirely digital intervention. So a wide range of larger and smaller technologies of all different sorts. Next slide, please. So now I want to move on from I4I, talk about the AI award, which is the NHS, which you almost certainly heard about. It's a joint or triply badged scheme through the Accelerated Access Collaborative, NIHR and NHSX. It's part of the NHSX AI Lab. So next slide, please. The AI Lab is a 250 million pounds investment over 3 years by the government, which is centred in NHSX, and they've allocated a certain amount to that towards an award to build a pipeline of new technologies. So next slide, please. And that 140 million that the award is planning to deploy over 3 years. We've had call one, and this was the scope of call one. It was a very broad call. Earlier in the year, we just about three weeks ago, was announced the awardees for that from that first call. We're expecting to run roughly 2 competitions a year over the 3-year period. So there probably will be an announcement about a second call at some point fairly shortly. I can't say exactly when that's going to happen, but it hasn't been announced, but it's worth keeping your eye open for that announcement, and I think it's likely to be fairly shortly. Next slide, please. We cover all the phases of development. So the intention of this award is to bring the best and identify the best AI technologies that are going to benefit the healthcare system, both patients and the system. So phase 4 is been largely run by the NHS Accelerated Access team in particular. And the main reason for that is that they're interested in if these things perform as well as they are anticipated to do in multiple real world settings, the idea is that they should be able to be procured quite quickly and spread very widely across the system quite quickly. What we're trying to do in the phases 1 to 3, which more or less map onto those 3 areas of the I4I program that I mentioned in terms of the early stage feasibility through a development prototype stage, through a real world evidence generation step, Those are really about building up the pipeline of new technologies, which are going to be ready and being brought forward for the NHS later on. So next slide, please. Just a few contact details. I think there was a question on the chat earlier on about contact details. So the NIHR website, if you have a question about I4I, use the I4I email address. That will get you through to one of the many people on the team who can answer your question and make contact with you. We have all the programs and funding programs. The AI award link is there, which talks about AI, and there's another AI activity that we're funding through NIHR as well. And there's an inquiries email that you can contact to find out more information. And I think that's me done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian, for a very comprehensive overview on accessing funding opportunities under NIHR. I'd like to finish off the webinar by introducing Michael Kipping, who will talk about another route in terms of funding into the healthcare industry. And Michael comes from the UK RI. So over to you, Ian. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So firstly, thanks for the invitation to come and chat to you today. Before I get started, you've already had a lot of information and you're going to get more from me. The main thing I'd say to take away from certainly my slides is that speak to DIT if there's anything that's sort of evoked any sort of interest today, or speak to NIHR or us directly, and we can help you navigate the environment. It is complex, but that complexity just underlines just how much the UK has to offer. So next slide, please. Okay, so I'm Michael Kipping. I work for an organisation called Innovate UK, and Innovate UK is part of a bigger organisation called UK Research and Innovation. Okay, if you just click on, please. Okay, and so UKRI brought together, when it was formed, 7 research councils, Innovate UK and Research England. So we're kind of, Innovate UK is kind of like the research council for industry. The UKRI's annual budget is around £7 billion. Just click through to the next slide, please. And the purpose of Innovate UK is really to drive the UK's economy. So NIHR, we heard about, have kind of lots of fantastic offers around accessing the UK and the English healthcare system to generate clinical evidence, and they're I guess looking more at the healthcare needs of the UK, whereas we're looking at driving the UK's economy, so creating jobs and revenues. So when we're funding organisations, the UK doesn't have to be the focus of that company. So if you're developing a product and the target market is Germany or the US or China or Singapore, wherever it might be, that's fine. We don't specifically look to solve UK challenges in themselves. Okay, next slide. Okay, we've heard a bit about the MedTech sector already, so we can skip on from that. So the first thing, if money is a key challenge for all companies when you're starting out, irrespective of where you're based. UK has a really rich funding environment. So in terms of state aid funding, so we Innovate UK largely deliver state aid funding. So there are certain rules around that. As you've heard, there's also funding from NIHR, but we also have a very rich investor community through angel investors, VCs, corporate investors, so on and so forth, and really good links to investors overseas as well. So it's a really good place to do innovation, both in terms of accessing finance, but also accessing the clinical environment and the academic research environment. So Innovate UK sits inside government, but our broader family of organisations that we fund include something called the Knowledge Transfer Network, a Catapult Network, and the Enterprise Europe Network. So the KTN and EEN really provide sort of input and advice to companies. whereas the Catapult network provides specific skills. So we have a medicines discovery catapult, cell and gene therapy catapult, high value manufacturing catapult, and you can work with them. And they have, they have facilities, they have skills and expertise that you can utilize to develop products themselves. But they all sit outside government. So we fund them, but they're all individual organizations, and they're all there to support you as companies in terms of developing your products. Okay, next slide. This is probably one I would certainly write down. I would take a note of the Knowledge Transfer Network. So the KTN are a great resource in terms of looking at funding opportunities from the whole of the UK. So they list our funding opportunities from Innovate UK and the UKRI more broadly, but they'll also list opportunities from NIHR, charities, and other funding bodies. So it's a really good place to start if you're interested in finding a bit more about the funding landscape. Okay, next slide. As we've heard already from Ian, the funding valley of death. So that point where you've got products that are potentially a bit more risky to develop. So in terms of a company, are they the sort of things that you want to invest in, or attract investment from outside to develop? It's a huge challenge, and it was identified in the 2012 Life Science Strategy, and that's why Innovate UK and NIHR have kind of specifically honed in on this development period where funding is a real challenge and getting investment is a real challenge. Okay, next slide. So here are just some of the opportunities that we as Innovate UK and UKRI more broadly deliver. And I'll just talk briefly about a few of them very, very quickly. Okay, next slide. So the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, so it's a great big government investment in R&D over 4 years. And we heard a little bit about it earlier, but basically the UK is investing heavily in R&D and want to get to a point where we're investing 2.4% of our GDP in research. So over the next few years, we're going to be really ramping up investment within research and development across all sectors. Okay, next slide. The program that I look after is called the Biomedical Catalyst. So it's probably primary Innovate UK funding mechanism supporting health and life science SMEs. It's been running since 2012, and we've provided around £210 million of funding awards since then. The point of the program is to help UK SMEs grow, develop innovative products and services, and try and join up the funding landscape a little bit. As I said, we're not focused on companies that are developing products for the UK specifically. They might be, and that's fine. We're looking at supporting companies that are developing products for whatever market. Okay, next slide. Despite its name, and it not necessarily the best name in the world, so biomedical obviously has a very specific definition. The program itself is technology agnostic. So we support everything and anything across the health and life sciences landscape. So digital health, absolutely in scope, MedTech in scope, IVDs, vaccines, cell and gene therapies. We've supported all sorts of companies. And some of the companies that were highlighted earlier have had funding from NIHR, but also from Innovate UK. Okay, next slide. Again, just to give you an example of the sorts of funding schemes that we have. So within the Biomedical Catalyst, there are actually 4 streams. So early in the development process, we have feasibility, and the maximum total project costs there are around £200,000, right up to late stage development work, so maybe human clinical trials, where the total project costs can be up to £4 million. So as you move down the product development pathway, obviously the costs go up, and the money available in terms of grant funding also goes up. Okay, next slide. We've had a couple of independent evaluations of the program, and it really delivers value. So for every £1 invested by the government, it generates around £4.72. But probably more importantly, it really helps leverage R&D investment. It creates jobs, and from company perspective, kind of the added value, along with getting the money to do the project work that you want to do, it's also been shown that having an Innovate UK award is a sort of an independent badge of excellence that investors look at very kindly on. So if you've had an award from us, it's far more likely that you'll get investment from an angel, VC, corporate investor, whatever. So there's a sort of a double whammy of benefit in terms of getting an Innovate UK award. Okay, next slide. In terms of other sort of ways that the UK supports companies, the program's have been shown to be at least as effective as another support mechanism called R&D tax credits. So it's a good program. It's competitive, but it's a good program. We have we have a program competition underway at the moment, £30 million, and we expect there to be a lot of demand for the program. But the benefits to the companies of getting these awards have been shown to be really powerful. Okay, next slide. Okay, if you just click through until they're all up, yeah, that's brilliant. So in terms of what you can use the money for, pretty much everything in it, pretty much everything and anything. So we can, we heard about MHRA earlier. Obviously, they're our competent authority for the UK, but they are a little bit limited in terms of the advice they can give you, because obviously they can't, sort of be the regulator and give you sort of lots of too much advice as well. So we can help support you get regulatory consultancy. A couple of really good organisations you might want to look at are TOPRA and RAPS, and they have they're membership organisations, and they have professionals across the US, Europe, really well worth looking at. If you want to implement a quality management system or cover costs for CE marking or FDA approval or CFDA, PMDA, whatever the regulatory environment that you're looking at getting your market into, we can cover that. We can also help support clinical investigations that might be supported by NIHR, and design testing. So we have a fantastic facility in Birmingham called MedTech that do really fantastic sort of human factors and usability work. It's a really unique facility, and they can replicate lots of different clinical environments and generate a lot of the evidence you would need for a regulatory submission without needing to be in a practicing clinical environment. So that's a really good organisation to look at. Also, Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors, well worth looking at them as well, because usability is such a crucial element in the design of medical devices and including digital products. Okay, next slide. Another program really wanted to emphasize is Eureka. So Eureka is a program that allows 40 different countries to work together. So, companies in UK could partner with companies in Singapore, for instance, and money can be made available through the Eureka network to do collaborative R&D work. So this is something that kind of specifically you could tap into without having to be based in the UK, because a lot of the funding mechanisms we've discussed do require you to be or to have a base and be registered in the UK, whereas this one allows you to continue being based in Singapore but partner with UK companies or with academic institutions. Okay, next slide. And yeah, lots of different opportunities and different programs that are run through Eureka. Okay, next slide. And again, Eureka isn't just around healthcare; it covers lots of different sectors. But if it's something that you're interested in, I'd suggest that you really look at the Eureka website and look at opportunities within Singapore itself. Okay. So normally, a network project, for instance, it might have perhaps an organisation, a company in the UK, maybe one in Singapore. You might also want an academic institution in the UK or a healthcare provider in the UK or likewise in Singapore. Typically, there's at least 2 or 3 countries involved. For the Eureka network project I've got running at the moment, we've got 8, and that's around digital health. And companies can look at working with organisations in any of those countries. They don't have to partner with all of them. They just need to have a partner in at least one of those countries. And typically, projects go up to around £1 million. Okay, I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, for an insight into funding from UKRI. We have a couple of minutes left of the webinar, and there's lots of questions coming in, which is excellent. And I'd like to quickly, before I go to questions, just to recap very, very quickly as to what you've heard today. You've heard from Ivana talking about access to a very broad clinical research network. You've heard from Ian the access to funding and supporting that valley of death between the innovation side and that side just before you hit pre-commercialization. And finally, you've just heard from Michael in terms of how UKRI support research and connections to commercial interests beyond UK government and enabling you to grow and expand beyond the UK environment. So that's a broad recap of what you've heard today, and I hope that what the presenters have done has answered some of the questions posed in the overview and deepen your understanding of UK's MedTech environment. What I'd like to do is just put some questions out to the panel. I have one. What funding support and collaboration opportunities is there for service innovation?
Okay, I'm happy to jump in with that one.
Thanks.
So from an Innovate UK perspective, obviously we've heard about funding specific product development, but we also fund sort of platform technologies. So and those platform technologies might be in terms of developing sort of drug discovery AI platforms. It might be sort of platforms for enabling sort of communication with patients across social care. But we have a program called SMART, and SMART is a sort of a catch-all for any and every potential idea that companies have. So it's an open program, and that's certainly one avenue that you could look at. Depending on the scope of the project itself, also the biomedical catalyst might be an option for you. But again, what I would suggest doing if you have something specific in mind is just reach out to us. We're more than happy to have a chat to you and just sort of run through what you're looking to do and give you a bit of advice on where to potentially look for funding.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, worth saying. So I'll just pop in there very briefly to say the AI award, when it's on the assumption, I'm making a rash assumption here that the scope for the next call of the award will be similar to it was in the first one. There's quite a bit of activity around that would fund that area if you've got AI involved in your technology.
Thank you. I've got 2 questions which are roughly on a similar theme. So many thanks for the great insights in receiving funding. There's a question whereby, in both questions relate to, is there an obligation to develop IP that would be co-owned by an overseas company and a UK institution? And this is roughly also linked, do you require to be a UK-based company or partner to be accessing these funds, either from NIHR or UKRI?
So if I can start with, because I was just starting to type an answer to one of those questions. So so in IP terms, the answer is no, you need to tell us what it is going to be. Normally we prefer in I4I to fund the lead organisation that's going to be developing the foreground IP. It makes things a bit easier. However, and there's no requirement that necessarily is the case. To answer the second part of the question, you're, as I mentioned in my talk, you will need to be, the lead organisation that you're working with would need to be based in England to be eligible for NIHR funding, for most of the NIHR funding. However, also bear in mind there's committees will make decisions around, this is UK taxpayers' money, so some money can definitely go outside of the UK, but it would have to be fairly strongly justified, and we have done that clearly in the past. But it's a slightly more difficult discussion if the money is going outside of the UK.
Okay.
Yeah,
Michael,
from a UKRI perspective, I think fundamentally it's thinking about what you're trying to do as a company. You know, what are you accessing the money for? And is it just about accessing money, or do you want to access skills and expertise? So, is there an opportunity to actually, think about coming to the UK and having a base here and not just accessing money, but accessing the skills and expertise that we have would be one point. And I'm sure DIT would love to have a chat to you about that. But in terms of the funding itself, our funding typically is state aid funding, and like with NIHR, you would need to have a base in the UK itself. So you need to be registered in the UK, but we don't take any sort of equity position or IP position in your company itself. I think the other program that I mentioned is Eureka, and that program is specifically set up to allow companies in different countries to work together on a program, and really it's up to you to work out as partners the distribution of any IP and benefits that come out of that project.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Ian. There's one last question, and I think this one's going to go to Ivana. Ivana, there's a question that I believe you mentioned, the patient pathway. Are you able to quickly, in 2 minutes, just discuss what particular stage should be described at the innovation stage?
I'm not sure I understand the question correctly. If we're referring as innovation stage, the stage where there isn't a prototype developed, or are we talking about at which innovation stage patient pathways should be addressed? The recommendation would be that patient pathways are actually thought about as early as you're thinking about a new product, because how the product is going to be used is going to be deciding on how you should actually design it and what kind of testing you will have to do, both from the clinical side but also from the usability side. So we recommend to companies who come to work with us, especially when we connect them to the mix, to MedTech in vitro diagnostic cooperatives, to have the discussion about how their product is going to be implemented into the existing patient pathway, or is going to change the patient pathways immediately, because that will help them to design their product, but also to design the evaluation studies in a way that they collect the data that is going to be relevant to the regulators, but also to the end users, so hospitals or primary care centers immediately. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Just a quick one from DIT, as Michael mentioned it. Our role is really to help in Singapore and across other posts, and I know there's an audience from Indonesia, Australia and Japan, to help companies in those markets access and enter into the UK. And in particular, we work very closely with NIHR, with UKRI, to develop solutions that allow your companies to go into the UK, to do your innovation, to start a commercial opportunity, to look for partnerships in the United Kingdom and grow your business. So that's primary DIT's role, and hence today's webinar has been very useful in terms of connecting everybody together. And I thank Upmar and Azra for organizing this, and I'll hand over back to Upmar to close the webinar. Thank you.